I've been reading gospel accounts of Jesus for half a century. There's not much in them I could not quote you. I still struggle, however, to grasp some of the weightier concepts and apply them to my daily living. The disciples had it much harder. The majority of what Jesus was teaching them was new. They were exposed to different aspects of Jesus and Jesus' message daily. Their 3 years together shows progress, even as their struggle to grasp what Jesus was about went right up to the very end of their time together with him. How well we know the one we follow impacts how well we are able to follow. There was always more to Jesus than met the eye. How well do we know the one we claim to follow? Peter had confessed Jesus as Messiah, God's anointed one, God's Son. There were many competing claims as to who Jesus was or what his true role was in God's plan. That included Herod's notion that Jesus was John the Baptist come back from the dead after he had separated John's head from his shoulders. Peter's confession exceeded rampant speculations that are going around. When he made his confession and claim, Jesus told them not to spread that understanding around. Being Yahweh's anointed emissary, the Christ of God, the Son of God, was wholly true. But it was not what needed to be proclaimed and understood at that moment. Before understanding Jesus as Yahweh's Messiah, they needed to understand Jesus' character and Jesus' portrayal of the role of Messiah. Too many expectations floating around skewed their concepts of what Messiah was, who Messiah would be, what Messiah would do. They obscured and detracted from the character of Jesus as Messiah, what he was trying to accomplish, and the means that he would embrace to do so. Over 3 years, they had heard his Sermon on the Mount expounded. They'd listened to numerous parables. They'd watched him heal, forgive, feed, and reinterpret appropriate application of Torah, Yahweh's instructions. The means and depth of meaning behind the message, however, was not yet fully appreciated by these men. When Jesus first announced his impending death, these very disciples railed against the notion. They had begun grasping the message of God's love, grace, mercy, compassion, and care for all of humanity, sure. They were still unprepared for viewing love through the lens of Jesus' coming passion and death. Messiah and the Messianic reign still required power, conquest, violence, and putting down military and political opponents to make way for a new political reality and rule by God under Messiah in their eyes. Peter's confession was correct as far as it went. He still did not grasp what Jesus being God's Son and Messiah meant. He was hardly alone. None of them understood. The crowds understood it far, far less. Jesus had spoken of his oncoming death, but the crowds had brushed those words aside as something that made no sense. It had nothing to do with healing, feeding, and teaching them anyway. When Jesus had been more direct about it, Peter took it upon himself to set Jesus right. Messiah could not die. Messiah's death would upend the entire cart and destroy anything that Jesus had accomplished up to that point. If Messiah died, Messiah could not take the reins of Israel's political and military leadership. Today's passage dealing with Jesus' transfiguration stands in this context. The disciples saw more to Jesus than met the eye, but they were still processing what that was. Nothing in the Hebrew Scriptures established an expectation of God becoming incarnate and living among us. They were toying with Jesus as the closest thing possible to God living, walking, and talking in their midst. When Peter first declared Jesus as Son of God, he fell trembling at Jesus' feet. That shock had rubbed off, but they were still processing. Visions and dreams don't arise from our expectations. They were hiking uphill with Jesus, making him company, paying attention to his needs, and seeking what they would need for food, warmth, and shelter. With a long day's climb, they fell into an exhausted sleep as Jesus knelt to pray. Jesus' appearance changed as he prayed. Changed such that his face, hair, and clothing radiated light. At some point, they awoke in a daze and noticed Jesus' changed appearance, but also that he now had company. The two others were likewise in resplendent white, conversing about what events to come were in Jerusalem. Jesus' impending torture and death. This theme was as unsettling as the appearance of the three. Moses and Elijah turned as though to leave, most always the first to find his voice. Peter blurted out, "Master, it's a good thing we're here with you, Moses and Elijah. We can build booths for you like in Sukkot, the festival of booths. Then you can remain conversing here in relative comfort." The disciples were out of sorts, filled with awe, uncertainty, fear, wonder, and not wanting to let go of this experience until they could better process it. While Peter was speaking, a dense fog fell over them, completely obscuring their sight. Amid the cloud, they heard a voice saying, "This one before you is my beloved Son. I am very pleased with him. Listen to him and follow all of his instructions." The cloud dissipating, leaving the three disciples alone with Jesus and their amazement. Jesus said, "Don't be afraid. Shake the sleep from your eyes. We are leaving the mountain. Don't tell anyone what you have seen here until after I have been raised from the dead." They began downhill asking questions. Why do the scribes say Elijah must come before Messiah? Jesus told them that it was indeed true, as one needed to set the stage for Messiah, but that one had already come and fulfilled his mission. When this messenger of God had come, the scribes in particular had not recognized him as the one they expected. Rather than embracing him, they had abused and left him for dead. The three understood Jesus was referring to John the Baptist, whom Herod had recently beheaded. Jesus reminded them that he also would die at the hands of those who had rejected John. That statement had a chilling effect on them. How could Messiah suffer and die? How could that possibly be what awaited this one they had just seen transformed into something much more than normally met the eye? How could God's emissary die at the hands of mere mortals? That would destroy the whole purpose of Messiah's coming. A dead man cannot govern a nation, direct its armies, establish peace throughout the land. Peace required strength, power, force, might. It required subjecting opposition and keeping all opposing enemies in fear, knowing they had no power to overcome superior might. They'd seen Jesus walk on water. They'd seen him order the winds and waves to be still. They'd seen him heal people from all sorts of infirmities and even raise Lazarus from the dead. Death resulted from a lack of power, a lack of control, a lack of ability to live, to win, to evade attack or opposition, to overcome opposition. Jesus was full of grace and love and compassion, but he was hardly lacking in power or authority. Surely he could use that power and authority to protect himself from whatever opposition arose. That was how victories were accomplished. What Jesus was saying was senseless. They still needed to better understand Jesus. They still needed a better grasp on the character of God's grace and the value God placed on life, love, compassion, forgiveness, and goodness. Hearing all Jesus' words about loving neighbors and loving enemies into friends had not yet filtered deeply enough into their hearts and minds. They still needed to grasp that in God's sight, love is the means, and love is its own end purpose. Our eyes may be drawn to power, but doesn't love have power beyond our sight?